Hello and welcome back to Be a Loser. Some of the most common questions I get are about diet and why I recommend a low-carb, high-fat diet. Many people argue that there are other types of diet that have historically been shown to help with controlling or reversing type 2 diabetes. Many people still believe that a diet low in fat is the best option to reverse insulin resistance and thus reverse T2D. Personally, I don't think it's that simple, and most of my internet research really shows that our low-fat, high-carb recommended diet of the past 50 years has gone hand in hand with the obesity and diabetes epidemic. But I'm not a doctor or a nutritional expert, so it's easy for people to discount what I may believe personally. That's why I try to compile as much information as I can from scientific studies, as well as the opinions of medical professionals. As many of you know, Dr. Jason Fung is one such professional and really the basis for this entire YouTube channel. Dr. Fung discusses some of these more radical ideas in his blog on the Intensive Dietary Management website. I definitely encourage you to read them, but as I always do, I'll discuss a few of them in this video. So, let's talk about the Kempner rice diet, the Pritkin diet, and diets in general. In his blog, Dr. Fung refers to author Denise Minger, who is the author of a book titled Death by Food Pyramid. Specifically, he refers to her blog post titled In Defense of Low Fat. Now, in this blog post, Denise discusses the rice diet used by Walter Kempner, and Dr. Fung also discusses the aspects of the diet with which he disagrees. The Kempner rice diet, for those of you who don't know, was a diet consisting of rice, fruit juices, and sugar. That's it. It was a very low-fat diet containing less than 10% fat. For some context, a typical low-fat diet at the time consisted of 20 to 30% of fat. Now, Dr. Kempner was a clinician at Duke University and treated over 18,000 patients with this rice diet in the early 1940s. It would appear that there were three main categories of diseases being treated: kidney disease, malignant hypertension or high blood pressure, and obesity and type 2 diabetes. Now, the assumption about this diet is that it works so well because it is low in fat. However, as Dr. Fung states, we can state for a fact that the diet works, but we can't make the assumption that it works simply because it's low fat. So in order to determine why it works, we must first break down each of the diseases that it treats. So, if we first look at kidney disease, we must understand that there are numerous types of kidney diseases. So, what type was Dr. Kempner treating specifically? Primary kidney disease, or glomerulonephritis. I hope I got that right. From a statistical standpoint, the majority of these patients would be suffering from IgA nephropathy, also known as Buerger's disease. Some cases of IgA nephropathy are caused by carbohydrate-binding proteins known as dietary lectins. The two most prominent of these are gliadin, which is found in gluten and the main cause of celiac disease, and bovine serum albumin, which, just as it sounds, is found in cow's milk and other dairy products. So there are studies that look at an elimination diet in which all foods are eliminated and then gradually reintroduced with the exception of wheat, gliadin, and dairy, bovine serum albumin, to avoid antigens. Antigens are substances which stimulate an immune response in the body. Now, in the study, 11 out of 12 patients improved. This diet was not low in fat. It was simply eliminating antigens found in dairy and wheat. The Kempner rice diet was also absent of wheat and dairy, and thus would have been low in these antigens as well. So the diet would most likely work well for IgA nephropathy, but not because it was low in fat, but instead because it was low in these dietary lectins. So if we look then at malignant hypertension, malignant hypertension is extremely high blood pressure, typically 180 over 120 or higher. At the time of this diet, there were basically no drugs to treat this type of hypertension, or any kind of hypertension really. However, for several decades now, there has been a correlation between lowering sodium and reducing high blood pressure. There's not really any benefit to those with normal blood pressure and sodium reduction, but for someone with extreme hypertension, a low sodium diet would be beneficial. Well, guess what? The Kempner rice diet has virtually no sodium. Lowering sodium intake will over time reduce hypertension. It has nothing to do with fat intake. If one ate an all-fat diet and no sodium, then the same result could be expected. So here's the area of the diet that's most relevant to those watching this video. Even though the diet was extremely high in not only carbohydrates, but refined carbohydrates, people lost weight and reversed type 2 diabetes. So let's take a quick look at an excerpt from the diet. A patient takes an average of 250 to 350 grams of rice, dry weight, daily. Any kind of rice may be used, provided no sodium, chloride, milk, etc. has been added during its processing. All fruit juices and fruits are allowed, with the exception of nuts, dates, avocados, and any dried or canned fruit or fruit derivatives to which substances other than white sugar have been added. Not more than 1 banana a day should be taken. White sugar and dextrose may be used ad libitum. On an average, a patient takes about 100 grams daily, but if necessary, as much as 500 grams daily should be used. Tomato and vegetable juices are not allowed. So, apparently you can eat 2,400 calories of refined sugar per day and still lose weight. So how does that work? Well, as it turns out, the diet was actually tailored based on what disease you were trying to treat with it. So for kidney disease and hypertension, patients ate 2,200 calories per day on the rice diet. The key is that these were not patients who needed to lose weight. Now, Dr. Fung references an interview with Dr. Rosati, who continued prescribing the diet after Dr. Kempner. And as it turns out, unlimited rice and sugar were not prescribed for weight loss. Instead, the diet was severely calorie restricted, 800 to 1,000 calories per day. Additionally, Jean Anspaugh, who was a former patient of the rice diet, wrote a book titled Fat Like Us that described the diet for weight loss as spending all that money eating rice and fruit and starving to death. Now, she certainly didn't describe the diet as, wow, I sure did eat rice and fruit until I was stuffed. And in an article written in the Journal of American Medicine in 1974, Dr. Eugene Stead, another physician at Duke University, wrote about the rice diet as a treatment for edema and hypertension. But what's notably missing? Obesity and diabetes. So he said the rice diet was low in calories, protein, and sodium chloride. And that's exactly what Dr. Fung is pointing out is potentially the reason for the diet working for hypertension. Additionally, people who stuck to this diet and succeeded with it were eating only about 20 grams per day of protein. That's well below the recommended daily allowance and very far below what most people eat now. So if we take what we know about the rice diet, we can fairly obviously show why people lost weight and reversed type 2 diabetes. Now, an average person eating the standard American diet eats approximately 2,400 calories per day. About 60% of this would be carbohydrates. So that's roughly 1,400 calories per day of carbohydrate. And remember that the other 1,000 calories per day would be made of protein and fat. As we know, protein does have insulin-stimulating properties, and it can thus lead to weight gain. So the answer stares us straight in the face. On the rice diet, patients were only eating 800 to 1,000 calories per day of refined carbohydrates and little to no protein. This is well below the 1,400 calories per day of carbohydrates of the standard diet, which also includes significant levels of protein that also lead to weight gain. And one last little tidbit for you. Dr. Kempner was known to whip his patients in order to keep them compliant.
Whoppa! What's whoppa? You know, whipped. Whoppa! It's not whipped. Whipped is... That's what I did. Whoppa!
Yes, you heard that right. He literally whipped them. And that right there is why, even though the diet worked for weight loss due to highly restrictive caloric intakes, it ultimately failed, as most monotonous fad diets do. They simply aren't enjoyable. Eating one thing over and over all the time is joyless and ultimately leads to failure. Any diet that's highly restrictive will, in the long run, fail due to lack of compliance. And yes, that includes even the ketogenic diet. But hey, we'll get into that more in a bit. Just let's all calm down. Now, there are other supporters of the low-fat diet. Dr. Furman, Dr. McDougall, Dr. Barnard. But they don't allow unlimited amounts of rice and sugar in their diet plans because it simply doesn't work in a mixed diet. They still avoid refined grains and sugars, just like the low-carb and paleo advocates. We're all so close to the answer, and yet we're all still so far. Dr. Fung describes in another blog how Denise Minger also wrote a post about the very low-fat Pritkin diet. Created by Nathan Pritkin, an inventor in the United States, this diet was composed mainly of high-fiber, low-carbohydrate, low-fat foods. Now, Pritkin had a very close relationship with Senator George McGovern, and thus this diet formed the basis of many of the low-fat recommendations of the 1977 American Dietary Guidelines. I have a video all about that if you'd like to check it out. Pritkin's colleague, R.J. Barnard, published many studies on the diet showing its ability to reduce many diseases associated with metabolic syndrome. These include certain cancers, type 2 diabetes, cholesterol, heart disease, and so on. And as we've seen discussed in many of my videos, there are cultures that historically ate very low-fat, vegetable-based diets, also had low incidence of these diseases. Now, two that Dr. Fung often references are the Kitavans and Okinawans. The interesting thing about this is that these are the same benefits that are claimed by those who encourage low-carb and ketogenic diets, myself included. But how can a very high-fat diet and a very low-fat diet have the same benefits? I mean, by its very nature, the Pritkin diet should fall under the auspices of the carbohydrate insulin hypothesis. Eating high amounts of carbohydrates should lead to high levels of insulin and ultimately, over time, obesity and type 2 diabetes, along with the other diseases associated with metabolic syndrome. High-carb diets and high-fat diets should be at opposite ends of the spectrum, right? I mean, here's where Dr. Fung and I are going to blow up your world. Macronutrients, the gospel of LCHFers, are the wrong measure of a diet. Now, I've discussed this briefly in another video, but trying to reduce the complex nature of foods and their effect on the human body to a mix of macros is just simply wrong. I mean, yes, refined carbohydrates lead to increased insulin levels, but they're not the only factor involved. If you go through my entire LCHF series, I discuss how all of the different types of food affect weight gain and health beyond just the macronutrient count. There are protective factors in all foods. There are factors that can cause weight gain in them as well. It doesn't all just boil down to less carbs equals less insulin equals less weight gain or more weight loss. It's just not that simple. And as we should know by now, not all carbohydrates are the same, just as not all proteins and fats are the same. The more that a carbohydrate is processed, the greater the effect it has on your insulin levels. A whole carbohydrate like a baked potato will have a significantly lower impact on serum insulin than a bowl of highly processed cereal. A visual guide of the carbohydrate level of foods makes this very plain to see. 30 grams of carbohydrates can be an enormous serving of vegetables or one hamburger bun. So we're asking the wrong question when it comes to the Pritkin diet. It's not how many carbs. For LCHF, it's not how much fat. And for everyone else, it's not how many calories. It's what is happening to insulin. Insulin is what drives obesity and type 2 diabetes. If a high fiber, high unrefined carbohydrate diet lowers insulin, then you will see all the benefits of weight loss and reduction in type 2 diabetes and all diseases associated with metabolic syndrome. And if a low carbohydrate, high fat diet also lowers insulin, then you will see identical benefits. We need to evolve from a carbohydrate-centric view of obesity to an insulin-centric view of obesity. Now, if we look closer at the Pritkin diet and those based on it, we see that the carbohydrates being eaten are unprocessed and do not increase insulin greatly. There are low or no amounts of sugar. There is a lot of fiber. There is less animal protein. This diet does not increase insulin. It lowers insulin, and therefore it will have all the benefits that we discussed. And these same benefits can be found in any diet that lowers insulin levels, LCHF and paleo included. Now, what Dr. Fung stresses about any diet is that it's the processing of foods that's toxic, not their macronutrient counts. Any food, be it fat, protein, or carbohydrate, becomes more detrimental to your health the more that it has been processed. You can eat any diet you want as long as it keeps insulin levels low. This is how you derive the benefits in a high insulin disease state, aka metabolic syndrome. So then, why does Dr. Fung recommend an LCHF diet with intermittent fasting? And his answer is because most people want the Twitter version of my dietary theories, rather than slog their way through 50 or 60 posts. But you don't have to do that because you've got Be a Loser. The main takeaway from this video and all my videos is that we need to evolve our thinking about obesity, diabetes, and metabolic diseases. It isn't calories cause obesity. It isn't carbohydrates cause obesity. It's the insulin. And that's all for this one. Now, if you liked the video, please hit the thumbs up as it helps me gain more exposure. And of course, please consider subscribing to the channel. All you need to subscribe is a Gmail account. As always, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, keep being a loser.